This is TJ with Tech Made Easy. Welcome to the channel. My channel is all about making things affordable, practical, and easy. What we're going to do today is we're going to try 3 ways that you can try Linux without installing it on your hard drive. Now, one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because Windows 10 is coming end of life in about a year and a half, maybe less. And with Windows 11, there's a lot of people that are hesitant on Windows 11. So if you're not familiar with Linux, let me explain how the Linux install works. When you create an install disk, it gives you a live version of that distro. And if you don't know what a distro is, in the Linux world, there's hundreds of distros. There's really 4 that I recommend for new users to start with, but you can go ahead and put that on a USB. And when you load up the USB, it gives you a live version of that desktop. And you can use it, you can install apps. There's not that many limitations on it, so it's a way for you to try the desktop before you install it. And then it's got a little icon installer there that you can now install it on your system. Or the way we're going to do it, we're going to install it on an NVMe, and you can get one of these enclosures, or you can get one of these adapters for an SSD. So the 3 ways of doing this is that you create a bootable live install disk of Linux, and with that you can go ahead and play around with the desktop to see what you think, or you can create what's called a bootable live persistent disk. And what a persistent disk does is it allows you not only to change things in there, but after you're done changing them and turn and reboot your computer, everything that you did is still on that persistent disk. On the other live one, without persistent, everything you do when you reboot the computer, if you go back into that drive, everything's gone. And so the persistent one is a way for you to just make a live Linux desktop and use it for a while to kind of get used to it. Or you can do an NVMe and do it that way. And this is the way I did it. Okay, I just want to explain something about Linux really quick. You can run Linux from a USB. A little different than Windows. Windows doesn't allow you to do that unless you have special software like Rufus that allows you to do that. But if you're going to run Linux from a USB, don't use just any USB. This particular USB from Samsung reads at 400 megabytes per second. It writes at 60 megabytes per second. So it's definitely fast enough to run a Linux desktop. Just realize if you're going to install any apps on this that it's going to take a little bit longer just because of the 60 megabyte read speed. But this is the way that 4 years ago, I went ahead and downloaded a ton of distros and put it on a USB drive. Now, the USB drive I had was a faster USB drive, and that's how I tested all of these distros to decide which one I was going to use. So the 3 methods I'm going to talk about, if you are going to use USB, spend a little bit of extra money, maybe the $13 that this costs for a 64 gigabyte, or $17 or $18 for a 128 gigabyte version of this particular USB. Your experience with using Linux from this USB was going to be greater, much greater than using just a cheapo USB that only reads about 5 to 10 megabytes per second. So within this past year, I actually went to a different version of Linux, and so I went from Linux Mint XFCE to Linux Mint Cinnamon. So within the distros, they have different desktop versions, and I really started liking what I saw Cinnamon doing, so I went ahead and installed it on NVMe, and I used it for a while, and then I went ahead and transferred it to my PC instead of running it off of a USB drive with an enclosure. It worked great. It's awesome. It's not like Windows. Windows, you can't install it directly on a USB and try it out, with the exception of using Rufus to make Windows to go. I have a video on how to do that below, but let's go ahead and let's go over these 3 methods of trying Linux out. The last method we're going to do is we're going to actually install it on this NVMe. So these 3 methods aren't the only way to try out a Linux desktop. The other way is just to install Linux on your drive. And the Linux installer will see that you have another operating system on there, and it'll ask you, do you want to install it next to the operating system? If you hit yes, then it creates a dual boot menu. So when you boot up, there will be a menu there asking, do you want to go into Windows desktop or a Linux desktop? Well, we don't want to do that if we're just trying it. It is a popular method that people do that are using Linux and Windows at the same time. But the problem that I have with dual boot, that dual boot menu can get corrupt, and a lot of people don't know how to fix it, or if you can fix it, or maybe Windows crashes, you're starting all over. So these 3 methods are really the best way. But once we get to where we install Linux on this NVMe, and we run it from this enclosure, you will have to unplug the hard drive in your computer. Otherwise, it's thinking that you're going to do a dual boot through Linux. And so once you're done installing this, then you just go ahead and plug your hard drive back in. In your BIOS menu, you boot from this if you want to boot to Linux. If you don't want to boot from Linux, then you just don't press anything, it'll boot right into Windows. Now, if you have a laptop and you don't know how to disconnect your hard drive because you've got to take it apart, then just use the first two methods. The first two methods, you don't have to mess around with unplugging the hard drive. So let's get started. All right, so now we're at my Windows desktop. Before I show you these three methods, I do want to show you something with my Windows 11 here. I want to show you the processes that I'm running at. Normally Windows 11 runs 150 processes, between 140, 150, and then depending on what apps you put on, it can go 200 more. But if you're interested in how I debloated Windows 11, there will be a link down below which you can watch that. I just wanted to show you that. Okay, so let's grab what we need here. So the first thing we're going to grab is Rufus, and we're just going to grab whatever the latest version, depending on when you're watching this. You just want to go on there and get the latest version. Right now it's 4.5. We're going to get the P, the one with the P. That means it's portable. You don't have to install it; just runs on its own. Now the reason why we're getting this one is because one of the USB drives that we're going to create actually needs Rufus to do that. If you already have a program that can create a bootable USB, that's fine. But this particular one, you see what we're going to create what's called a persistent drive. So that's why we're getting Rufus. Now we're going to also download Linux Mint. There's a couple of reasons why I'm downloading Linux Mint as well. But at this point, it doesn't matter. You can download whichever distro, Linux distro you want. I'm just doing this with Linux Mint. Now we're going to grab the Cinnamon Edge version. It has a newer kernel in it, which means it has the newer drivers and more updated drivers. And depending on how old your system, how new it is, it might be better if you download this one. So all you have to do is click on that there. Again, all the links will be down below. And then you got to click a mirror that you want to download from. As soon as you click on a mirror, then it'll start downloading. I'm going to stop this download because I've already downloaded it. And so now let's go ahead and launch Rufus. And we're going to create a bootable USB using Rufus, and I already have that disk in here, that Samsung disk. And now we're going to go ahead and select our ISO, and I'm just going to Linux Mint here. Now this partition scheme, you can go ahead and do GBT unless you really have an older system that doesn't use UEFI. You could do this one as well. I'm just going to do this one. Again, I think most computers that this is going to be done on can use GBT. If you're not sure, then do it with MBR. Now, this is the thing I want to talk about. See this persistent partition size? If you go ahead and scroll this over, then it'll make this USB drive editable. And what I mean by this is this will make more sense when we boot up Linux. But for this particular part, I'm not going to do this. But I actually have a drive that is a persistent partition that I did do a persistent partition, and I don't like to use the whole drive. I'll dial it back just a little bit, just to leave a little bit at the end. Don't ask me why I do that. That's just me. But this is the second method that we're going to use. We're going to make a persistent partition. But for this one, we're just making a bootable USB. But I'm not going to go through and make the USB twice. Just so you know, if you want a persistent partition drive, go ahead and move this over, because that is the second method of doing this. And I'll talk about what the difference is once we get into our USB, boot up our USB drive. So you don't have to really do anything else. All you have to do is just hit start and just go ahead and do what they recommend here. And it's just going to tell you everything's going to be erased. Now it's going to go ahead and start. Now this is the reason why you want to use one of these faster drives. It'll create this boot up disk way faster than a regular USB, just because of the read and write speeds of this drive. And but once it's done, it's just going to be solid green, and it'll pop up and say it's done. Okay, so now it's done. So we just take our USB, we can close this. Now again, just for the time's sake, I'm not going to go ahead
I've already created a drive with persistence on it, but for time's sake, I'm just not going to go through this twice because it's the same method. You just choose how much of your drive you want to make persistent. So let's go ahead and close this, and let's boot into Linux. Now, before we boot into Linux, every system is different on how you choose to boot off of a USB. You'll have to check your motherboard's manufacturer. Like HP is F9, Dell is either F10 or F12, and whatever motherboard manufacturer you're making, you may even have to go into your BIOS and say you want your USBs to be bootable. Most of the time the default is that they're bootable. So let's go ahead and reboot, and we'll go ahead and get into Launch Linux. Okay, I just need to talk about 3 things here before we boot into Linux Mint here. This is my Linux Mint desktop. If you want to learn how to customize this desktop, I will leave a link down below of one of the videos I created on creating this desktop. It's very easy, point click, and it kind of gives you a little tour of the Linux desktop as well. And also too, because this may be the first time you're running Linux, I'm going to give just a quick little tour of the desktop so you're familiar with it. And then the other thing as well is you may have to disable secure boot. Windows 10 can run without secure boot. All secure boot does is just make it so if there was a virus that ever got into your boot sector, that it wouldn't affect your computer or couldn't get in there. So you can do that. Windows 11 though, you're required to run secure boot unless you use Rufus to remove those hardware requirements, and that's one of them. And so if you're running Windows 11, you may not want to disable secure boot. If you do that, it could, and then enable it. It may or may not mess up your Windows 11. Just be aware of that. Okay, here we are at my boot up menu, and here's that Samsung drive right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and then all you have to do is just wait for it to boot up. And it'll come to this grub menu, and if you just hit enter, if you don't hit enter here, in a matter of seconds it will automatically launch Linux. Okay, so now we're at our Linux desktop. Now from here we're going to install Linux onto the NVMe. But before we do that, I just want to give you a rough overview of the desktop so you're not going into this blind. Let's take a look. Okay, now we've just booted up our live USB. The reason why they call it a live USB because it's a little different than Windows. Windows, when you create a USB install disk, it just automatically goes into the install. You don't get to try Windows. With Linux, it's different. You get to try the distro that you put the USB on. And so if I go here, this is the file manager. Now I will say this much. When anything that you do here on your USB live disk, it will not be saved, because you can install software on here and everything like that. But for this presentation, I went ahead and swapped out my persistent live disk. So in here, anything I change here will be saved. In other words, this is not the default desktop that Linux Mint has. But I will say this much: as far as these drives go over here, your live one will come with the install Linux Mint. It'll show your USB operating system that you're running from, and then this local drive here, this is where my Windows drive is that I bypassed by booting up through the USB. So you can see my Windows here, and so the live USB is going to be exactly like this. It's just it'll have a different background. I don't like the background. In fact, I'm going to show you that really quick. The default background with Linux is let's see, it's this right here, and I'm just not into the background, so I copied my own Linux background, and I actually changed the color. I actually edited this background to blue instead of gray. So anyway, let's get started here. So I just want to show you a couple things just so you can get started, but again, go and watch videos on this. Watch my video on how to customize this, but I just want to show you a few things. So when you first load up here, and it's going to ask you to probably it's going to show that it needs updates, and you can update later if you want. You'd probably want to update as soon as you can though. I've already updated this persistent drive. Now this is the whole thing about a persistent drive. It's not going to ask you for a username or password. So anything you do in here, you don't need that. When we install Linux, which we will be doing here in just a minute, The install will ask you for your username and a password, and then you're required to put in your password every time you make a change to the system. So anytime you install software, it's going to ask you for the password. But I just want to just show you a little bit of the operating system here. So if we go here, here's all of our applications here, just similar to Windows. And here we have some Office tools, and I'm going to show you those here in a minute. Video tools, so on and so forth. Obviously internet, we've got Firefox here. In fact, let's go into Firefox just for a minute. Most of your Linux distros come with Firefox installed. Some of them do come with Google Chrome installed, but we can just go ahead and play this here just like we would normally. So what I want to do here though is let's go ahead and so what I want to do here is I want to go into this file folder, and I want to show you some examples here really quick. Some stuff we can do. But before we do that, I want to show you how you install software, because a lot of people use Google Chrome. So let's go hit the start menu here, and up here is a software manager. Every distro has a software manager. You do not have to go to the command line to install software in Linux. A lot of Linux people, when they're demonstrating Linux, they will install stuff from the command line. I actually see it less and less now, but the software store or manager that's on Linux, depending on the distro, is really extensive. Now the first time that you launch the software manager, it might take a little while for that to launch. You'd have to go and connect to the servers that all this stuff is on. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to look up Google Chrome. And here's Google Chrome right here. All you have to do to install it is just hit install. Now one thing that you're going to see is on the right here, you're going to see Flatpak, and there's going to be maybe other options. And let me just go in here really quick, and let's just look up Spotify. So on Spotify, when you go here, you're going to have two options. One is a system package, and so the way Linux works is it gets a little confusing. I don't want to go into this right now, but whenever you go in, if you're going to install some software and it shows a Flatpak version, just install the Flatpak version. Usually the Flatpak version is the most current and up-to-date version of it, and so the other version is what is in that distro's repository. But all you have to do here is hit install. And while that's installing, I want to show you something here. And now it's going to install a little slower because my drive only writes at 74 gigabytes per second on this USB. But what I want to show you here is we can go ahead and launch a video here. And I'm going to let me hurry and pause this, and because I want to go to music here and I want to mute this. And so we'll go ahead and play this here. And so you can play your videos. Now, I went ahead and already installed VLC, and so you could make VLC the default application for playing videos if you want to do that. But then once you have Spotify installed, you just hit launch, and it'll launch Spotify. Now I'm not going to sign in or anything like that. It'll also be in your menu here under sound and video. Whoops. And there is Spotify right there. So it's very easy. And remember, I'm gonna be doing it. My next video is gonna be on the 3 distros that I think new beginners should use when coming to Linux. And you can see that it's just super easy to install an application. I never go to the command line. The only time you have to go to the command line to install something is maybe if you're doing something with networking and it's a tool that you need for networking. But most of the time you can install everything from the software store. Now if you want to remove an app that you did, you just hit remove and it's gone from the system. So similar to Windows, and that's how that works. So now let's go back to that folder that we had open. Alright, so I've got this folder with some files in here. Now one of the things that I wanted to show you real quick that's kind of quirky about Linux is when you go to do a right mouse click and you say create document, it only shows a text document. If you want to create documents, if you want Word and Excel to show up in there, then you just have to create a generic Word document, spreadsheet, and presentation or PowerPoint, and you just go ahead, and I'm going to cut these and I'm going to put this in the templates, because for the longest time I didn't know how this worked, because I'm like, wait a minute, how come I can't create a Word or an Excel spreadsheet from here? Now you can do that, and so now that that's there, and also too, we've created that right here, and so Linux usually comes with LibreOffice, which is compatible with Microsoft Office, and there's also Only Office. Both of them are really good, and here you go. There's our new document we just created. Now let's go back into Files. Now if I want, I can open up this Word document here, just like I would in Word, and then I can go here and I can open up this spreadsheet. Now I would say the most popular Office tools in Windows is LibreOffice and Only Office, and I actually use Only Office. My wife goes back and forth between Only Office and LibreOffice. She likes the spreadsheet better in LibreOffice than Only Office. And so here we have a PowerPoint presentation, and this is one I put together for one of my videos, and so on. So it's totally compatible with PowerPoint. You have, usually with most distros, you have all these tools already there. If we want to look at an image, we can just click on it here, just like we would any other, and here we can view it. We can go to the next image here if we want. Now the other thing is PDFs. We've got a PDF viewer built in. Now I'm not going to go into it, but LibreOffice actually can edit PDFs as well. Minor editing, not major editing. What I want to show you here is that this one here, it comes with this viewer, but this viewer you can't really edit with, but most of your distros come with some type of picture editor. So here in Linux Mint it's called Pix, and so we'll just open that with Pix. And now if we want to adjust this, I'm going to hit this one here because it just has a whole bunch of different settings that you could maybe set this picture at. Yeah, just hit escape if you don't want it, and then you can also adjust the individual colors here if you want it. So it's very you have a lot of things that are already here when you first load up Linux, and I don't know if you realize that. So I just wanted to show you this kind of stuff really quick so you can see. If I want to create a folder in here, I just say create new folder, just like I would in Windows, name this whatever, and so on and so forth. And so I just wanted to give a brief view of the desktop. Find distros to put on your USB drive. Like I said, that's what I did when I first got into Linux. I just tried a whole bunch of them. I ending up with Linux Mint. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to install Linux Mint onto an NVMe drive. But before I do that, if I want here, this is where I go to my desktop, and I can show now the home folder on my desktop. I can show the trash can on my desktop, and then I can also, another thing that I want to do is I just want to show you that you can edit the panel here. I'm just going to do a couple of things here really quick just to show you. Again, this is not a guide on how to customize it, and then we can pull this over there as well, and so now we can just have everything in the center, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this panel edit off. Let me get out of this. Linux just makes your desktop very customizable. Okay, so now let's go ahead and install Linux Mint. And then this is the way it works with almost every distro today. It's very similar. They use the same install. This one just defaults to English, so I'm going to hit continue. It defaults to English, continue. But you can choose your languages here. And then you want to click on Install Media Codecs. So it's really not that much different than Windows, and it notices that it sees my drive on here. It doesn't show it here. It's not going to let me install on my operating system, so it sees I have a drive here. So it says erase disk and install Linux Mint. If I had multiple drives in here, it would give me an option. And technically, whenever you're installing an operating system, whether it's Windows, Linux, you want to just have your USB drive and the drive that you're installing on. And so I've already, like I said, I've already taken out the Windows 11 disk. So you just hit install here. It's going to tell you it's going to create these partitions. So we just hit continue. And I'm in the Denver area, so I'll just leave that. And here's where you're going to put in your name. I'm actually going to name this computer. I'm just going to name it Mint PC. And then this, for demo purposes, I'm just putting in a short video or a short password. Now, this option here is usually available in every install. Log in automatically when you reboot, or required password to log in. Well, or you can actually encrypt your home folder. Maybe if you have a laptop or something like that, and it could possibly get stolen if you encrypt it, then and it'll ask you for a password for that. Then nobody can get into your hard drive if they take it out of your laptop and hook it up to another system to access it that way. So we're going to leave this like this. On my personal desktop, I have login automatically because nobody is around my desktop that I need to worry about. And then once you do that, just sit back and it installs. Once it's installed, we'll just go ahead and boot to it. There's nothing you have to do to boot to it. It's just like the USB. Doesn't ask you any questions. It just boots you right into Linux. So let's go. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while this installs. It'll take a few minutes and we'll come back and boot up. Okay, once it's done installing, it'll just say restart. So let's go ahead and restart, and we'll go into our fresh install of Linux Mint. Okay, here I am again at my boot up menu with my HP desktop. Now, one of the things, once you boot into your drive, what's going to show up is so right now my Linux is on the Sabrent enclosure. But because I've booted up with it before, now it just says UEFI Ubuntu. So Linux Mint is based off the Ubuntu desktop. So if you see that, then you know that you're choosing your Linux desktop. Other ones might say something different. So it may not always show the enclosure, but it's going to show the flavor of Linux that you're using. So I'll just go ahead and hit that, and let's go into Linux. I already booted once into it, but my video recorder wasn't working, and so I had to redo it again. Okay, so now here we are at our brand new installed Linux desktop. We need to put in our password here. Okay, so this is what you're going to get when you install Linux Mint. Now, the persistent one doesn't give you this welcome screen. There's a few disadvantages using the USB Live Persistent. It doesn't ask for a username or a password, and that can make some limitations on what you do with Linux. It's just meant for you to use it as a tool, not necessarily to run it every day as your operating system, but it's a great way to kind of play around with Linux and keep your settings without losing them after you reboot, like the USB Live. So you'll get this welcome screen here, and I would suggest going through it. It'll teach you a lot about how the interface works here. My logical drive here, this is my Windows drive, and again, it's in a USB enclosure. So now this is the one thing about Linux is that it is compatible with Windows drive. So if I put in a USB, it'll pop up automatically here for me. There's my USB right there. It opens that up, and this is just a text document that I created. There's nothing in here, but I can copy this over here. I can delete this from here. Even though this is a Windows formatted USB, I can just copy this back here. So everything's really compatible there. I can't remember on the Mac side. You might be able to access Mac format as well. I can't remember. But at least you can, if you're coming from Windows, you can have access to all of your Windows files this way as well. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully this will give you a chance to go ahead and play with Linux, maybe get used to the desktop if it's something that you're considering. It took me a while to move to Linux, but once I did, I love using Linux now. I love how flexible the desktop is. It meets my current needs. It may not meet your needs, but this is a good way to find out and play with Linux. This is TJ with TechMed Easy. Hope that was helpful. Have a great day. Thanks.
Now that was